This is absurd. Get out of my house. Donna Beatriz, you have just evicted the only owner of this house. What? That is impossible.
It is true, Donna Beatriz. Livia Azevedo enters a Montenegro family dinner, knowing something has been prepared against her. Before relatives and executives, her mother-in-law accuses her of marrying for money and demands she renounce any rights to the mansion. Henrique tries to avoid a scandal, but his hesitation hurts his wife more than he realizes. When the lawyer opens the folder on the table, the humiliation planned by Beatriz turns into the beginning of a secret buried for decades. Beatriz Montenegro didn't wait for dessert to be served. She raised her crystal glass, tapped its thin stem against the tabletop, and produced a sharp sound that silenced the dining room of the Acacius house. Livia remained seated at the opposite end of the table, exactly where her mother-in-law had ordered her name placed. Beatriz looked at her like someone finally removing a mask. Enough with the theater. You entered this family without assets, without a surname, and without anything to justify your presence here. Livia rested her fingers on her napkin. Did you invite me to dinner or to judge me? Beatriz smiled joylessly. I called you here to sign. An employee placed the thin folder in front of Livia. Henrique leaned forward. Mother, we agreed this conversation would be private. Private for what? For her to invent another story? Beatriz retorted. There is no story, Livia said. Then sign it, replied her mother-in-law. Or admit before everyone that you married my son to take what belongs to the Montenegros. Livia did not open the folder. She immediately observed the people around her. That had been prepared long before she arrived. Caio Mendes, Augusto Montenegro's lawyer during the last years of his life, sat near the library with a dark leather briefcase leaning against his chair. He wasn't touching his food. Livia had invited him without explaining why, and Beatriz had accepted his presence, believing he would witness the renunciation. Open it, her mother-in-law ordered. Livia took out the document and read the first few lines. This is not a simple statement. It is a protection for the family, Henrique said, trying to keep his voice low. You would temporarily cede any claim to the house until we resolve the situation with the banks? Livia looked up. What claim? Henrique hesitated for a second. Beatriz answered for him. The claim that every con artist creates when they realize the marriage won't give them enough access to the money. A murmur went through the table. Livia closed the folder. You want me to acknowledge in writing that this house belongs to the Montenegro group? Because it belongs to it. And what if I don't sign? Beatriz rested both hands on the tabletop. You are leaving here tonight? Henrique stood up so fast that his chair scraped the wooden floor. Mother, stop this now. The firmness of his tone didn't reach his eyes. He was angry but also afraid of the repercussions for the group's board. Livia, don't sign yet, he said, turning to his wife. Can we talk in the office? Beatriz laughed. You still don't get it. She brought a lawyer to a family dinner. Henrique looked at Caio and then at Livia. Did you know this would happen? The question hit her with precision. It wasn't the defense she had hoped for. It was a suspicion. I knew your mother was planning something, she replied. That's why I asked Caio to come. And you didn't think you should tell me? I thought you would do what you always do. Ask me to endure one more night to avoid a bigger problem. Henrique opened his mouth but found no immediate answer. Beatriz took advantage of the silence. See? She calculates every move. First she entered this house, then convinced Augusto to treat her like a daughter, and now she shows up with a lawyer. Livia felt the blood rush to her face but kept her voice controlled. Do not use your husband's name to justify what you are doing. Beatriz slammed her glass against the table again. The crystal shattered at the base. Don't speak Augusto's name as if you have any right to his memory. The house manager entered discreetly upon hearing the glass break. Beatriz didn't even look at him. Sergio, have them take Mrs. Livia's bags outside. The driver can drop her off wherever she chooses. Henrique circled the table. No one is going to touch her things. Then you can leave too, his mother replied. But tomorrow you will explain to the board why you allowed your wife to jeopardize the only property that still guarantees our line of credit. Livia opened the document again. There was a discreet clause at the end of the second page. By signing it, she would not only renounce a potential claim, she would declare she recognized the Acacia House as the exclusive historical asset of the Montenegro family. It was a trap written to look reasonable. She placed the paper on the table and pushed the pen away. I won't sign it. Beatrice crossed her arms. Then admit what everyone already knows. What? That you waited for Augusto to die to show your true intentions. The following silence seemed larger than the room. Henrique stood beside Livia but did not hold her hand. Please, he said in a near whisper, let's postpone this. Sign a temporary version, and I'll handle the rest tomorrow. Livia looked at him for a few seconds. You're still asking me to sign. I'm trying to stop this from destroying the family. Enrique, this is already destroying ours. Caio Mendes folded his napkin, stood up, and pulled his briefcase onto the table. The click of the latches made Beatrice turn her head. I gave you no authorization to present anything, she said. The authorization does not need to come from you, the lawyer replied. He withdrew 3 envelopes, a set of notarized copies, and a recent certificate. Beatrice turned pale before he even spoke. Caio opened the first document, placed it before Henrique, and then addressed the lady of the house with a calm that made the sentence even sharper. Mrs. Beatrice, you have just evicted the sole owner of this house. Where else? No one moved. Beatrice recovered her voice first. This is impossible. Caio pointed to the date and the registration. The transfer was completed before Livia's marriage to Henrique. It is not marital property nor a donation made during the union. The property is registered exclusively in the name of Livia Azevedo. Henrique reread the page as if the words might change. Then he looked at his wife. Did you know Livia? Yes, she replied without looking away. I found out 3 weeks ago when Caio approached me. I asked him to verify everything before telling anyone? Anyone, he repeated, including me, especially before telling you, Beatrice pulled the certificate closer and scanned the lines in a hurry. Augusto couldn't have done this. Caio did not respond. She raised her head, seized by a rage that no longer seemed like mere indignation. On that date he was under medication. I said no document should be signed on that day. The lawyer remained motionless. How do you know the exact date? Livia asked. Beatrice squeezed the paper between her fingers. Because I knew my husband's schedule. The schedule doesn't show when a registration was completed, said Caio. Only someone who followed the procedure would know. Beatrice shot him a warning glare. Careful with what you're insinuating. I am not insinuating anything, the lawyer replied. I am correcting a statement. Henrique ran a hand over his face. Mother, you knew my father intended to transfer the house. She turned to her son. Your father was confused at the end of his life. Livia grew close to him while we were all busy trying to save the company. I visited him because he was lonely, Livia said. Not because I wanted this house. Beatrice laughed bitterly. How convenient. A property restorer becomes an old man's confidant and ends up the owner of the family's most valuable residence. Caio closed one of the envelopes. You keep treating this as a donation. That is not how Augusto described the deed. The word deed hung in the air, but another term used by Caio weighed even more. He called the transfer the fulfillment of an obligation. Henrique realized. Which obligation? The lawyer looked at Livia, respecting the boundary they had agreed upon. She still did not have all the answers. There were incomplete documents, references to an old partnership, and your mother's name in places where it should never have been erased. We are still verifying it, Livia said. Beatrice stood up. There is no obligation whatsoever. This house has always belonged to the Montenegros. Livia followed her mother-in-law's gesture, and her eyes landed on the framed drawing above the sideboard. It was an old reproduction of the east facade made before the last renovation. In the bottom corner were 2 letters almost hidden by the frame, R and A. Augusto had changed the subject when she asked about them. Now Caio placed a copy of a similar blueprint on the table. Mr. Augusto asked that certain documents be preserved until the ownership was questioned. Beatriz lost control of her expression for an instant. Where did you find that? In the file indicated by him. What file? One that you tried to close after the funeral. Enrique turned to Livia, torn between the shock of the revelation and the pain of having been kept out of it. You came prepared for this today? I came prepared not to be forced to sign a lie. You could have trusted me. She breathed slowly. When your mother called me a gold digger at our civil wedding, you asked me to understand her grief. When she removed my name from the group's anniversary dinner, you said you didn't want a public conflict. When I found out she had staff report every time I entered your father's office, you promised to talk to her later. Enrique lowered his eyes. That doesn't mean I would turn against you now, but you hesitated before asking what she was trying to make me sign. Beatriz observed her son's silence and sensed an opportunity. Enrique, you need to choose whether you will protect your family's name or a woman who hid a property from you. Livia picked up her bag. Don't ask him to choose. He has already chosen many times. He just never called it a choice. Enrique lightly held her arm, but she pulled away gently. Don't go. I'm not being kicked out, she replied. I'm leaving because I've decided to. Before walking through the door, Livia handed Sergio the set of keys she used daily, but kept a small bronze key attached to her bag. Beatriz noticed. That key doesn't belong to you. Livia stared her down. Did you just hear that the entire house belongs to me? Beatriz pressed her lips together. The East Room has been locked for 20 years, so it's time to find out why. Caio put away the documents, leaving only a copy of the certificate in front of Enrique. Beatriz approached her son and spoke in a low voice, although everyone could still hear. Your father lost his judgment because of that woman, and now her daughter intends to finish the job. Livia stopped in the hallway. Which woman? Beatriz realized too late that she had said more than she should have. His mother, she replied, unable to take it back. The name Rosa Azevedo crossed the room without being spoken. Enrique looked at the old floor plan, at the initials in the corner, and then at Livia. The house hadn't appeared in his life by chance. It had been built upon a story that someone had erased. Outside, the lights of Jardim Europa illuminated the trees and the parked cars. Livia walked down the steps without waiting for a driver. Behind her inside the mansion, Enrique asked his mother what Rosa had to do with that house. Beatriz did not answer, and it was her silence, not the certificate on the table, that made everyone realize the real dispute had only just begun. At 7:20 in the morning, Livia Azevedo's name was already on the front page of 3 business portals. The most shared headline said that the unknown Montenegro daughter-in-law had taken the family mansion just weeks after the patriarch's death. Another insinuated that she had used her closeness to Augusto to obtain an estate valued at millions. No text mentioned the certificate from before the marriage, or the clause Beatriz had tried to make her sign, or the fact that Livia had left the House of Acacias of her own free will. Sitting at a table by the window of a coffee shop in Villa Madalena, she watched the cars move slowly down the street while her phone vibrated non-stop. Clients, journalists, and former colleagues asked questions that sounded like accusations. Caio called for the 3rd time. Don't answer anyone until we align on a statement. Livia took a sip of her now cold coffee. I don't want to turn this into a public war. Beatriz already has, so I'm not going to help her. On the other end of the line, the lawyer took a deep breath. Your silence can be interpreted as guilt. Livia looked at her own reflection in the glass. I spent years speaking softly so as not to bother that family. Maybe that's why everyone now thinks they can speak for me. When she arrived at the architectural restoration studio, she found 2 photographers by the entrance and a reporter trying to convince the doorman to let her up. The space occupied the top floor of an old building, renovated with exposed brick walls, shelves full of wood samples, and large tables covered in technical blueprints. It was the only place in São Paulo where Livia had never needed to ask for permission to exist. Her partner, Marina Falcão, closed the door as soon as she walked in. A client canceled this morning's meeting. They said they didn't want the project associated with a family scandal. Livia set her bag down on the table. Which client? The Nogueira Group. They negotiate with the Montenegros? Marina confirmed with a nod, and a news site called asking if you used information from the Acacia House to inflate your portfolio. Livia let out a brief, humorless laugh. My own company is being treated as part of a scam. Marina stepped closer. You don't have to pretend this doesn't hurt. Livia opened her computer and saw dozens of messages. I'm not pretending. Yes, you are. You do that whenever you believe that showing pain will give someone power over you. The sentence hung between them. Livia closed the screen. She had left the mansion taking only a bag and a bronze key. Now she realized that Beatriz didn't just want the house back, she wanted to destroy the credibility that allowed Livia to live without the Montenegros. Enrique appeared at the studio shortly before noon. He brought no driver or assistant. He had his jacket folded over his arm and an exhausted expression as if he hadn't slept. Marina met him at the entrance and hesitated before letting him pass. Livia was leaning over a blueprint when he approached. We need to talk. She continued examining the paper. You always say that after the damage is already done. Enrique placed copies of the news reports on the table. I didn't authorize any of this, but someone in your family did. My mother denies having spoken to the press. Livia looked up. And do you believe her? He didn't answer immediately. I believe we need to stop the situation from getting worse. For whom? For all of us? Enrique pulled out a chair, but she remained standing. He explained that the board was worried about the line of credit tied to the mansion and that some partners feared a long legal dispute. He proposed that Livia temporarily transfer the property's management to a family-controlled foundation, keeping her name on the deed. It would only be until we clarify the origin of the transfer, he guaranteed. Livia stood motionless for a few seconds. Your solution to prove I didn't steal my own house is to hand control over to the woman who tried to kick me out, not my mother. The foundation. Who chairs the foundation? Enrique looked away. Livia pushed the documents back. Then there is no difference. He walked to the window, overlooking rooftops, antennas, and the taller buildings, downtown silhouetted against the sky. Of course there is. The group could lose major contracts, and I already lost a client this morning. Enrique turned around. I can resolve this. That is exactly the problem. Do you believe you can fix everything without admitting who broke it? Livia's voice didn't rise, but every word seemed to strip away a layer of protection between them. Enrique rested his hands on the back of the chair. I was trying to protect you yesterday. You asked me to sign. I asked for time. You asked for my name on a document saying the house belonged to your family. He closed his eyes for a moment. I hadn't read the final clause. Because you trusted your mother, and you didn't trust me. Livia felt the blow, but she didn't back down. I found out about the transfer 3 weeks ago. Caio showed me incomplete documents. He mentioned an old obligation and asked for discretion until he verified the registry. What do you think I should have done? Walked into your office and said, your father left me a house without knowing why. Enrique replied with bitterness. You could have started by not bringing a lawyer in secret to a dinner. I brought Caio because your mother had already prepared my eviction. And yet you are still more offended by my silence than by her trap. Enrique left the studio without convincing her. Before leaving, however, he stopped in front of an old framed photograph on the wall. In it, a young Livia was holding Rosa Azevedo's hand in front of a white model. The image was faded, but the shape of the roof and windows resembled the facade of the Acacia House. Was that model your mother's? He asked. Livia stepped closer. I found the photo after she died. I never knew what project it was. Enrique studied the image for longer than necessary. I've seen something similar. She waited. In my father's office, there was a photograph kept inside a book with him alongside a woman and that same model. It was my mother, perhaps. Henrique ran his fingers over the edge of the painting. When I was a teenager, I heard my parents arguing about someone named Rosa A. My mother said my father should stop protecting a dead woman. Livia felt the air shift around her. Why had he never told her? Because I didn't connect the name to your mother. And, back then, I thought it was an affair my father was trying to hide. Livia's expression hardened. A mistress. I didn't say that, but she thought it. Henrique didn't deny it. The possibility he had just placed between them was worse than any headline. Not because Livia believed it, but because she realized Beatriz could use that version to destroy Rosa's memory. That afternoon, Livia asked Marina to cancel all her appointments and went down to the studio's storage room. Augusto had sent her 6 boxes 2 months before he died, saying they contained his professional research. Livia had only opened 2. The others remained sealed, covered in a thin layer of dust. Inside the 3rd box were supplier catalogs, photos of works, and specification notebooks from the 90s. In the 4th, she found a folder identified only by the initials CA. Among yellowed sheets appeared a detailed floor plan of the east facade of the Acacia House. The drawing was more precise than the reproduction hanging in the mansion's hallway. In the bottom right corner were 2 signatures. The first was Augusto Montenegro. The second was covered by a strip of paper glued over the surface. Marina brought a lamp closer. This was added later. Livia examined the fibers, the glue, and the difference in shading. During a poorly done restoration, she used a thin spatula to loosen just one edge. Underneath the strip appeared the curve of an R. Livia didn't continue. She didn't want to damage the document. Even so, she already knew. Rosa Azevedo, she murmured. Marina covered her mouth with her hand. Your mother designed that house. Livia replied in a low voice. Or she helped build something they decided to erase. Caio arrived at the studio in the early evening and confirmed that the plan should be analyzed by an expert before any complete removal. He also brought a partial copy of old business records. There was a transfer made by Rosa to a company that years later would be incorporated into Montenegro Group. The amount didn't seem extraordinary on its own, but back then it could have been enough to finance the purchase of part of the land. This still doesn't prove she was a partner, Caio warned. It proves there was a hidden financial relationship. Livia looked over the numbers. Why didn't Augusto make it all clear? The lawyer took a moment to answer. He intended to explain it in person, but he got worse too quickly. Before he died, he asked me to secure the house deed and preserve the files. And he never told Henrique. He said his son would need to discover who he was willing to protect before hearing the truth. Livia felt angry. He turned my life into a test for his own son. Caio did not disagree. Then he pointed to a note on the back of the blueprint. It was a reference to an east room and an acknowledgement plaque installed during the original construction. The door your key opens might contain the rest. Livia held the small bronze key. Beatriz knows about this? From the way she reacted, she knows at least enough to be afraid. While Livia examined the boxes, Henrique confronted his mother on the 4th floor of the group's headquarters on Faria Lima. Beatriz's office had glass walls, light furniture, and a view that made São Paulo look silent. On the desk, however, was a list of calls to journalists and a draft statement calling Livia a controversial beneficiary. You said you didn't speak to the press, Henrique stated. Beatriz closed the folder. I spoke with people capable of protecting our version before it destroyed the company. Our version is not the truth. The truth is that your father gave a family house to a woman he had known for a short time. Henrique placed the photograph of the model on the desk. They took a picture of the frame in the studio. He knew her mother. Beatriz's face did not change. but her fingers tensed over the pen. Rosa worked on some projects. She designed the house on the acacias. Many professionals participated because her name was removed. Beatrice stood up and walked to the window because people confuse talent with entitlement. Rosa helped Augusto when the company was in trouble and then started believing she could demand a part of everything. Henrik felt his old loyalty to his mother clash with what he had seen. She put money into the company, Beatrice. She took too long to answer. She made an informal loan. Your father paid what he owed. So why did he transfer the house to Levia? His mother turned around, because guilt was always his weakness. Later, while crossing Avenida Paulista under the lights of the buildings, Enrique called Levia. She only answered on the fourth attempt. My mother admitted that Rosa put money into the company. On the other side, there was silence. She called it a loan, he continued. Caio found a transfer, Levia replied, and a blueprint with my mother's name hidden. Henrik slowed down as he noticed the traffic was at a standstill. We need to open the East Room. I want to help. Levia looked at the open boxes scattered around. Do you want to help or control what we find? The question stung him because he didn't know the answer. I want to understand why you are at the center of a story that began before we met. Then start by understanding that I am not the accused. Enrique gripped the steering wheel. I know you don't know yet. If you did, you wouldn't have offered to hand over the house's management to your mother? He took a deep breath. I was wrong. It was the first time he had said that without adding an excuse. Levia closed her eyes for an instant, but not give in. Wrong is not the same as different. Before hanging up, she stated she would return to the mansion the next morning to open the room. Enrique asked her to wait for him. She replied only, Arrive before your mother. When the call ended, Levia stared at Rosa's partially revealed signature. For the first time, the Acacia house didn't feel like an inheritance. It felt like evidence. And someone was willing to destroy the past to prevent her from discovering what really belonged to her mother. Levia arrived at the Acacia house shortly after 8 a.m. and found the main gate open. Enrique was already in the garden in a white shirt, no tie, talking to Sergio near the side entrance. Neither of them looked relieved to see her. My mother had the lock on the East Room changed overnight, Enrique said as she approached. Levia pulled the bronze key from her purse. So she is sure that there is something in there? Sergio explained that a locksmith had arrived before 6, accompanied by 2 of the group's security staff, but he had refused to authorize entry without the owner present. Enrique gave him a look of surprise. You stood up to my mother. The manager maintained his formal posture. I obeyed the property deed. Levia thanked him and headed down the hallway, but found the door to the East Room covered by a temporary metal plate. The old lock was still there, intact, but inaccessible. On the wood, there were recent marks from tools. She didn't just want to stop us from opening it, Levia observed, leaving. She wanted to find out what was inside first. Enrique touched the plate. Can I have it removed? Not today. He frowned. Why did Levia look at the hallway cameras? Because your mother expects me to break into the room and give her images of destruction to hand to the press. Before I open that door, I want to know exactly what we are looking for. The decision led Levia to Belo Horizonte that very afternoon. Rosa had left few belongings, almost all kept by Teresa Azevedo, her older sister, in an old apartment in the Funcionarios neighborhood. Teresa greeted her niece with a tight hug and an expression that mixed concern with guilt. I saw the news. They're saying you deceived an entire family. Levia left her suitcase by the sofa. Maybe the entire family deceived mine. Teresa asked nothing more. She went to the bedroom, opened a closet, and pulled out a wooden box wrapped in a towel. Inside were letters, photographs, receipts, and 3 blue-covered notebooks. Your mother asked me to keep this. She said that one day you would decide if you wanted to know who she was before she was just your mother. Levia opened the first notebook. Rosa wrote about projects, meetings, and financial difficulties with an almost technical precision. On the pages of the second, the name Augusto appeared repeatedly. There were no romantic declarations, just discussions about land, investors, and a project called Casa das Acacias. "Why didn't you ever show me?" Livia asked. Teresa lowered her eyes. "Because Rosa died believing the Montenegros would honor the agreement. And because I was afraid you would look for Augusto and be humiliated." "He looked for me first." Teresa nodded, perhaps because she knew time was running out. In the third notebook, Livia found the first direct reference to the land purchase. Rosa had noted that she sold a small property inherited from her father and transferred the money to one of Augusto's companies under the promise of receiving a stake in the residential project to be built. She also described Beatrice's resistance. On a coffee-stained page, there was a sentence underlined twice. "Beatrice says a woman without a surname cannot appear as a partner of the Montenegros, even if her money keeps the company afloat." Livia reread the words until she lost track of time. Teresa sat down in front of her. "Your mother believed that project would be the start of her own career. She designed the main structure, chose the garden layout, and insisted on the east room because she wanted a workspace with morning light. The plaque mentioned in the plan was hers. It belonged to both of them, Augusto and Rosa. Beatrice had it removed before the opening." Livia closed the notebook. "My mother let them do it." Teresa smiled sadly. "Rosa was pregnant with you. The company owed money. Augusto said he needed a few more months, and Beatrice threatened to make everything public in a way that would destroy her reputation. Your mother chose to leave. She chose silence. No, she chose you. Silence was the price they demanded." While Livia read the notebooks in Belo Horizonte, Enrique spent the day in the Montenegro Group's financial archive. For the first time in years, he entered without notifying his mother and requested access to records prior to the old company's merger. The CFO tried to stall, claiming that part of the documents were stored outside of São Paulo. Enrique placed the copy of Rosa's transfer on the table. "I want everything related to this name." 2 hours later, he found a sequence of entries classified as asset maintenance. The payments began shortly after Rosa's death and were transferred to an account managed by Teresa for Livia's benefit. The amount varied according to the group's profits. It wasn't charity. It looked like a silent distribution of dividends. Enrique called his mother to the archive. Beatrice entered accompanied by the corporate lawyer, but he asked the man to wait outside. "You paid Rosa's family for 20 years. Beatrice closed the door. "I ensured the girl wouldn't suffer need with company money, with what was owed." Enrique pointed at the records. "So there was a debt?" Beatrice didn't answer. "The house was also part of it." "The house should never have left the family." "That doesn't answer it." His mother took a deep breath. "Rosa put up money when no one else would. Without that, hundreds of people would have lost their jobs. Your father promised to pay it back, then started saying she deserved a share of the project. I wouldn't allow an improvised partnership to destroy everything we had built." Enrique listened without interrupting, but his mother's voice grew harsher as she went on. Beatrice claimed that Rosa had used Augusto's gratitude to demand recognition, and that after her death he had turned his guilt into an obsession. "You want to know why your father transferred the house?" she asked. "Because he spent years believing he had betrayed a woman who trusted him. Enrique stared at her. "Betrayed as a partner or as a lover?" Beatrice opened a drawer and pulled out an old sheet of paper folded in half. "Read it." It was a letter from Rosa to Augusto. The first lines spoke of an impossible promise, the pain of staying close to him, and the need to leave before everything became irreparable. The letter ended abruptly after the sentence, "I will not ask you to choose between me and your family." Enrique felt a weight in his stomach. "Where is the rest?" "There is no rest." The page was torn. Beatrice stepped closer. You are trying to turn your wife into a victim because you're afraid to admit that she hid the truth. Rosa did the same with your father. She got close, became indispensable, and then demanded a place that wasn't hers. Enrique folded the letter carefully. If you believe that, why did you pay her daughter for so many years? Ooh. Beatriz remained silent. Because even you knew that something belonged to Livia, he concluded. When Enrique arrived in Belo Horizonte, that night he met Livia and Teresa at the small cafe where Rosa used to draw. The walls had been renovated, but Teresa had chosen a table by the window because she said her sister always sat there. Enrique placed the incomplete letter in front of Livia. My mother kept this. She read it slowly. Teresa recognized the handwriting immediately. The other page. Enrique looked up. Are you sure? Rosa never finished a letter without signing it. And she told me she wrote to Augusto after deciding to leave São Paulo. Livia stared at her husband. What did your mother say this meant? He hesitated, and that hesitation answered before his words did. She suggested there was something between them. Teresa leaned back in her chair. Livia remained motionless. And you came all the way here to ask if my mother was your father's mistress? Mistress? I came because I need to understand. No, you came because you still start with an accusation. Enrique lowered his voice. There is a letter saying she wouldn't ask him to choose between her and his family. And the next page is missing. I know, but for a few minutes it was enough for you to doubt. He ran his hand through his hair. My father lied his whole life. My mother too. You hid the house transfer. I don't know who to believe anymore. Livia closed the blue notebook in front of him. The difference is that I hid a piece of information for 3 weeks to confirm if it was true. Your mother hid a woman's story for 25 years to keep using what belonged to her. Enrique tried to touch his wife's hand, but Livia pulled it away. I am not saying that Rosa did anything wrong. You are asking me to prove that she didn't. That is not fair. No, Enrique. Unfair is my mother having been erased from a project she helped fund, and unfair is your family calling her an opportunist after living in a house designed by her. Unfair is you looking at a torn letter and considering the version of the woman who tore up the rest. Teresa got up discreetly and went to the counter, leaving them alone. Enrique spoke lower. My mother says she used the money to save the company. Maybe she believed she was protecting our family, and that gave her the right to destroy mine. No, but you are still looking for a justification for her. He closed his eyes. She is my mother. Livia felt the sentence cut through her, like something all too familiar. During the marriage, every one of Beatrice's cruelties ended up protected by that same explanation. And I am your wife, she replied. Enrique raised his head. I know. You only know when you don't have to choose. Livia slowly took off her wedding ring. She didn't throw it on the table. She just placed it next to the unfinished letter. I don't want you to choose between me and your mother. I want you to stop using that choice as an excuse to never face what she does. Enrique's face lost all its color. You are ending our marriage. Livia looked at the ring, but did not touch it again. I am ending the part where I wait for you to defend me after everything has already happened. He tried to speak, but she continued. I am going to open the East Room. I will restore my mother's name and protect the house with or without you. I won't allow your family to turn this into a dispute over a marriage of convenience. Enrique picked up the ring, but didn't try to give it back. And we cannot be resolved as long as you still look at me as someone who needs to prove she's trustworthy. Livia's phone vibrated on the table. It was Kyle. He informed her that Beatriz had called an extraordinary family and board meeting to formally contest the property transfer. He also discovered that 2 trucks had been sent to the group's external archive that afternoon to remove old boxes. Enrique heard the message and stood up. She's destroying the documents. Livia put the notebooks into her bag. Then stop asking me to wait for you to resolve it within the family. What are you going to do? She stared at him with a serenity that scared him more than any shouting. What I should have done from the beginning. Protect the truth without asking the Montenegros for authorization. The next morning, Livia gave Caio scanned copies of the bank transfer notebooks and the floor plan with the covered signature. She asked him to take every necessary step to prevent any changes to the Acacia house and preserve the files linked to the property. She didn't want to arrest anyone, destroy the company, or expose personal letters. She only wanted to prevent Beatriz from erasing more evidence. Caio noticed the missing wedding ring. Does Henrique know about this decision? He knows I won't wait anymore. The lawyer placed before her an enlarged photograph of the East Room wall taken years earlier during an inspection. Under the layer of decorative wood was the rectangular outline of a removed panel. In the corner of the almost invisible image appeared Augusto's signature and a note. The last page remains where Beatriz would never look. Livia recognized the handwriting and felt her heart race. The final page of the letter might still be inside the house. More importantly, Augusto had known that Beatriz would keep only the part capable of distorting the story. In that instant, Livia understood that the dispute would not be won by simply proving the property was in her name. She would have to demonstrate why it should have always belonged to Rosa's family. And for the first time since dinner, she felt no fear of losing Henrique. She feared losing the chance to give back to her mother the truth that had been stolen from her. Beatriz's summons reached family and board members at 6 a.m. with the urgency of someone wanting to turn a version into truth before anyone could contest it. The meeting was to be held at the House of Acacias. Beatriz had chosen the main hall, where the portraits of the Montenegros covered the walls and Rosa's name had never appeared. When Livia arrived shortly before 10, she found black cars lined up before the gate and a security team blocking the journalist's entry. Caio walked beside her, carrying the leather briefcase. Enrique was already in the hall, sitting far from his mother. He was not using the seat traditionally reserved for the heir. Beatriz, dressed in gray, kept before her Rosa's incomplete letter and a stack of documents prepared by the corporate lawyer. "You can still avoid a greater humiliation," she said, as Livia entered. "Acknowledge that Augusto was manipulated, and I will withdraw the public accusation." Livia placed the bronze key on the table. "You don't want to avoid a humiliation. You want to choose who will be humiliated." Beatriz offered a stiff smile. "Then let us find out who has the right to tell this story." The company lawyer began by stating the transfer could be contested due to doubts about Augusto's capacity in his final months of life. Caio did not interrupt him, merely noting down each claim while Livia observed those present. There were two of Henrique's cousins, 3 board members, the CFO and Sergio, called by Beatriz as a witness to the house routine. When the lawyer presented Rosa's letter, Beatriz took the floor. But this woman was not just a service provider. She tried to separate my husband from his family, and years later her daughter received the house. Henrique raised his eyes. "Show the next page." His mother pretended not to hear. "The letter ends where everyone can read it." "No," he replied. "The letter was interrupted where it suited you." Beatriz slammed her hand on the table. "You are choosing a woman who hid the ownership of this house from you." Henrique did not stand up, but his voice lost its former caution. "I am choosing not to condemn anyone with a torn letter." Livia felt the impact of the statement, though she wouldn't let it turn into need to hope. Henrique was finally standing up to his mother, but that didn't erase the times he had remained silent. Caio presented the property deed, the transfer made by Rosa, Augusto's former company, and the records of payments classified as asset maintenance. The CFO confirmed that the orders had been authorized for years by the family foundation's presidency. Beatriz tried to explain that the funds were voluntary aid intended for the daughter of a former employee. Livia opened one of Rosa's blue notebooks and read the note regarding the purchase of the land, the promised percentage, and the decision to hide the partnership until the company overcame the crisis. "My mother didn't receive help," she said. She received in an incomplete and silent way a portion of what was already hers. Beatriz leaned forward. A personal notebook does not create property rights. I disagree, Livia said, but explain why you paid for 20 years what you now call charity. Her mother-in-law looked at Caio. These documents were illegally removed from the group. Enrique placed the internal authorization that had allowed him access to the records on the table. I was the one who requested the copies. Beatriz turned to her son. You are going to destroy your father's legacy? Enrique replied without raising his voice. His legacy was already destroyed by the lie. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it. Beatriz still believed she held the most powerful piece. She picked up the letter and read the lines where Rosa said she wouldn't ask Augusto to choose between her and his family. Then she stared at Livia. Your mother knew exactly what she was doing. She approached a married man, became indispensable, and when she realized she wouldn't be chosen, she demanded assets. Livia closed the notebook. You built this accusation on a page that doesn't end. There isn't another one. Augusto said otherwise. For the first time, Beatriz lost her controlled expression. Caio placed the enlarged photograph of the east bedroom wall on the table and pointed to the note made by Augusto. The corporate lawyer tried to question its authenticity, but Caio informed him the image was part of a report filed before the patriarch's illness. Livia took the key. The last page is in this house. Beatriz stood up immediately. No one is going to open that room. Everyone looked at her. The excess of her reaction was worth more than a confession. Livia replied calmly, The house is in my name. You can no longer decide which doors remain closed. The metal plate had been removed by formal order before the meeting. When Livia turned the bronze key, the lock resisted, then gave way. With a low click, the east room smelled of old wood. Light streamed through high windows covered by blinds, revealing a drafting table, empty shelves, and rectangular marks on the walls. Beatriz remained in the hallway, unable to enter. Livia walked to the panel indicated in the photograph as a restoration point. She recognized that part of the paneling had been installed after the original construction. She ran her fingers along the joints and found a small piece of metal hidden under the molding. Henrik stepped closer to help, but stopped before touching it. "Ma'am," he asked. Livia nodded. Together, they removed the panel without damaging the structure. Behind it was a darkened bronze plaque attached to the wall. Caio cleaned the surface with a dry cloth. The letters appeared slowly. Acacia's House Project, Augusto Montenegro and Rosa Azevedo. Below the names, a sentence stated that the residence was born from the trust between two partners. No one spoke. Rosa's erased name was back in the place where it had always belonged. On the back of the panel was an envelope protected by a plastic sleeve with Augusto's handwriting. Inside, beyond the final page of the letter, was a declaration signed years before his illness. Caio read it first and handed everything to Livia. Rosa explained she was leaving not because she didn't love Augusto, but because Beatriz had turned a professional partnership into a moral accusation. She wrote that she wouldn't ask him to choose between her and his family, for the only choice required was between keeping or breaking one's word. In the last line, she asked that Livia's rights be preserved even if her own name had to wait. Augusto's declaration confirmed that Rosa had never been his mistress and that her money had saved the company, finalized the land purchase, and kept jobs during the crisis. He acknowledged having yielded to Beatriz's pressure, removing Rosa's name from the project, and delaying full restitution out of cowardice. Enrique looked up in shame. My father let everyone believe a lie because it was easier than facing you. Beatriz replied in a near whisper. He saved the family. Livia held the final page. My mother did too. The difference is that no one allowed her to receive the credit. The financial director compared the records with Augusto's notes and realized the payments were not random. They corresponded to a fraction of the income tied to the property and the old company's growth. One of the board members asked who had determined that formula. Beatriz replied, too quickly. It was a private agreement that Augusto insisted on keeping. The room went still. Caio looked up. Then you knew they weren't donations. Beatriz realized the mistake, but she could no longer turn back. I knew he felt in debt. Did you also know the reason for the amounts? Livia asked. I managed the foundation. It was my duty, and because of that I knew the date of the transfer, the existence of the room, and the reason for the payments. Beatriz gripped the edge of the table. I did what needed to be done. The company was dying. Banks were refusing credit. There were families who depended on us. Rosa wanted recognition at the worst possible time. Livia replied without cruelty. Perhaps you saved the company that year, but you spent the next 25 saving your own version of events. Beatriz looked around and realized she no longer controlled how others saw that story. Caio informed her that the documents allowed them to defend Livia's ownership and demand a retraction for the public accusations. He also mentioned that the letters could be given to the press to demonstrate the deliberate attempt to defame Rosa and her daughter. Beatriz lost her composure for the first time. You won't do that, said Livia. If these letters are published, they will turn Augusto into a coward, me into a thief, and Henrique into the heir of a fraud. Everyone expected Livia to seize the opportunity. A single authorization would be enough to destroy the image Beatriz had protected her whole life. Livia folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The personal letters will not be published. Henrique looked up, surprised. Beatriz didn't thank her. She just asked why. Livia replied, because I want to restore my mother's name, not steal yours. You will make a public statement acknowledging that the Acacia House belongs to me, that Rosa participated in the project, and that your accusations against me were false. Yes. The necessary financial documents will be presented to the board, but the private pain of 4 people will not be turned into a spectacle. Beatriz tried to regain her authority. You are imposing conditions. I am setting boundaries inside my home. The meeting could have ended there, but Henrique asked to speak. He walked to the head of the table, the place that once belonged to his father. He didn't sit down. I was a part of this, he declared, and his mother reacted immediately. You didn't know anything. I knew how you treated Livia. I knew she was excluded, watched, and humiliated. I told myself that keeping the peace was a way of protecting her when, in truth, I was protecting my position in this family. He looked at the board members at the dinner. I asked my wife to sign a document I hadn't read in its entirety. Then I questioned her silence before questioning the trap set against her. I wasn't just deceived by my mother. I chose to believe what required less courage from me. Beatriz whispered his name, but Henrique continued, I will not vote on any foundation decision while the records are being reviewed. I will also temporarily step down from directing the Jardim Sul project. One of the board members tried to interrupt, worried about the market. Henrique replied that the group would not regain its credibility by hiding the problem again. When he turned to Livia, he didn't ask for forgiveness. I have no right to ask you to come back. I only have the obligation to stop being the man who left you alone. After the board members left, Beatriz remained before the bronze plaque. Her face seemed smaller, without the authority that had always surrounded her. Do you think you won? Said Livia. No, I think I finally discovered how much we all lost. Beatriz touched Augusto's name. He promised he would never allow that partnership to threaten our marriage. My mother didn't threaten your marriage. The lack of truth did that. Beatriz turned wounded. You don't know what it's like to build a family and realize another woman occupies the most admired part of your husband's mind. Livia held her gaze. Maybe he admired the courage you demanded he hide. That doesn't mean he loved you less. It means he was too weak to be honest with both of you. Livia left the room without expelling her, but asked Sergio that no documents be removed. In the garden, Henrique reached her and held out the ring he had kept since Belo Horizonte. She closed his hand over the ring. Not yet. He nodded, accepting the answer. Livia looked at the windows designed by Rosa and the door that was finally open. Their true victory wasn't owning the house. It was knowing no one could erase her mother again. It remained to be decided if that truth still left room for a future with Enrique. Beatriz Montenegro's retraction was published 48 hours later in a text too short to contain 25 years of silence, but clear enough to destroy the version she had spread. She acknowledged that the Acacia House legally belonged to Livia Azevedo, confirmed Rosa's participation in the original project, and withdrew all accusations of fraud and manipulation. The news portals, which had called Livia a scammer, changed the headlines without apologizing. Some began to describe her as a forgotten heir, an expression she also rejected. "My mother didn't forget anything," she said to Marina while they reviewed the studio's notes. "She was erased." There is a difference. Livia did not grant interviews about the letters and did not allow the personal pages to be photographed. She disclosed only the records necessary to confirm the property's origin and architectural authorship. Caio warned that silence would leave questions unanswered. "Not every question deserves a public answer," she stated. For the first time, her refusal to explain everything did not stem from a fear of being judged. It was a conscious choice. Rosa would reclaim her name without her pain turning into entertainment for strangers. Beatriz left the House of Acacias a week later. There were no suitcases thrown on the sidewalk, nor servants watching the former owner's fall. Livia allowed her to organize the move discreetly and take the personal objects she had accumulated over decades. The decision surprised Enrique, but Livia did not want to repeat the symbolic violence she had suffered in that very dining room. Beatriz owned a spacious apartment in the Jardins district, furnished and maintained by her own income. She would lose no comfort, only the right to command a house that had never truly belonged to her. On the morning of the move, she found Livia in the East Room, examining the newly cleaned bronze plaque. "You could have thrown me out in front of everyone," Beatriz said. Livia continued measuring the wall. "Could I? And you decided to appear generous." "I didn't do it for you." Beatriz pursed her lips. "You did it for Enrique." Livia finally faced her. "I did it for myself. I spent too much time letting your choices define the woman I needed to be. I will not turn cruelty into an inheritance." The mother-in-law looked at Rosa's name engraved on the plaque. "You speak as if your mother were incapable of error. She erred when she believed that silence would protect everything. I almost repeated the same mistake." The Foundation's internal review removed Beatriz from the presidency and established that future decisions would be overseen by an independent board. The result did not destroy the Montenegro group, but it exposed old family control practices that could no longer be justified as tradition. Enrique kept his promise and stepped away from the Jardim Sul project, even when some executives argued his departure would be interpreted as an admission of guilt. He replied that remaining in the position as if nothing had happened would be a more serious form of dishonesty. For 3 months, he worked only on the transitional responsibilities, handed over documents, answered the board's questions, and refused interviews meant to exploit him. He also began to see his mother's calls as what she deemed a useless exposure of private life. Enrique did not argue. For the first time, his mother's disapproval did not determine his decision. In one of his sessions, he managed to say aloud that he had always feared becoming like Augusto, a man who loved 2 parts of his own life and lacked the courage to be honest with either. The therapist replied that fear hadn't kept him from repeating the pattern. It had only given him a sophisticated excuse for not noticing it. Enrique didn't reach out to Livia during the first few weeks. He sent only the documents still in his possession and a short message when the retraction was published. He didn't ask her to return, didn't ask about the wedding ring, and didn't try to use guilt to keep a door open. Livia found the silence strange. Part of her expected flowers, grand promises, or an appearance outside the studio, because That was how the Montenegros usually resolved conflicts, with gestures big enough to avoid difficult conversations. The lack of spectacle forced her to look at her own responsibility. She had hidden the transfer because she feared Henrique's reaction, but also because she had decided beforehand that he would fail. She had reasons to be suspicious, but she had turned those reasons into a sentence without a trial. One rainy night, sitting alone in the rented apartment near the studio, she opened his last message. Henrique had written that he had submitted a statement to the registry office renouncing any possible present or future rights to the Acacia house. The house would be hers regardless of the marriage's fate. Livia read the sentence twice. It wasn't a proof of love. It was his first action that required nothing in return. The restoration began at the start of spring. Livia decided the Acacia house would not be kept as a private monument to the Montenegro family nor turned into a luxury property. The East Room would become the center of a program dedicated to young architectural preservation professionals, especially women whose work often disappeared behind more powerful names. The space would be named after Rosa Azevedo. The residential part would be preserved, but the old reception hall would house exhibitions, workshops, and digital archives. Some of Henrique's relatives accused Livia of using the house to humiliate the family. She replied that the best way to protect an estate was to allow it to stop serving only the egos of its owners. Marina coordinated the studio project, while Sergio chose to remain as the property manager. When Livia suggested he could look for another job, he replied with dignity, "I served for many years those I believe to be the owners of this house. I would like to serve now the purpose it should have had from the beginning." The comment moved her more than any laudatory article. Beatriz asked for a conversation before the inauguration. They met in the garden, away from the cameras and advisors. She seemed smaller without the dining table, the portraits, and the staff that used to reinforce her authority. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she began. Livia replied, "Good." Beatriz accepted the blow without reacting. Yeah, she said that when Augusto revealed the company's crisis, she was pregnant with Henrique and feared losing not only the assets but the only social place where she felt secure. Rosa had appeared with talent, money, and Augusto's trust. Beatriz believed that if she allowed her name to be recognized, she would lose her husband and everything she had built. "I convinced myself that I was protecting hundreds of families," she confessed. Perhaps that was true for a few months. Afterward, I continued because I couldn't bear to admit what I had done. Livia listened without offering comfort. "You didn't need to be poor to fear poverty, nor did you need to lose your husband to treat my mother as a threat. But fear explains, it does not absolve." Beatriz lowered her eyes. Henrique said the same thing. "Then he finally stopped protecting you from the consequences." Beatriz did not respond. Before leaving, she lightly touched Rosa's plaque and murmured, "I should have left her name there." Livia said only, "You should have." On the eve of the inauguration, Henrique appeared at the Acacia house with a small wooden box. Livia was alone in the East Room, aligning photographs of the original project. He stood at the door until she authorized his entry. "I found this in my father's safe," he explained. Inside the box was the model seen in the old photographs, carefully restored. Under the base, Augusto had written the names of Rosa and Livia, followed by a sentence about houses that only remain standing when no one needs to disappear to support them. Henrique placed the box on the table and pulled the mansion's master key from his pocket. "I don't need this." Livia did not take it. "You are still invited for tomorrow as Augusto's son, as someone who helped correct what he didn't have the courage to correct." Henrique nodded, then placed the old wedding ring next to the key. "I also won't ask you to wear this again." Livia observed the ring. "Then why did you bring it?" "Because it was the last thing I tried to hold on to when I should have let you choose. I thought the decision about what to do with it needed to return to your hands." She closed the ring box, but she didn't return it or put it on her finger. Henrique breathed slowly. I spent a long time believing that protecting a family meant keeping it from breaking apart. Now I understand that some structures need to break so that people stop living trapped inside them. Livia leaned on the table. You learned that in 3 months? No, I only just began to learn it. The honesty of the response disarmed her, more than a promise of complete change. He continued, I left her alone many times, not because I didn't love her, but because loving you meant facing things that defined my identity. I chose comfort. By the time I finally acted, the damage was already done. Livia felt her eyes burn, but she didn't look away. I also decided you would fail before telling you the truth. You had your reasons. Having reasons doesn't make every choice the right one. The silence that followed was not empty. For the first time, neither used it to hide an accusation. Henrique asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding. Livia answered carefully, I don't want to go back to the marriage we had. His face tightened, but she continued, perhaps we can discover if there is something after it. No quick promises, no house as a prize, no mother between us, and no asking for trust before you show you know how to care for it. The inauguration of the Rosa Azevedo Center brought together architects, students, cultural journalists, and former employees who vaguely remembered the young professional behind the initial drawings. There was no red carpet nor any speech about family reconciliation. Livia spoke about authorship memory and the danger of letting power choose which names deserve to remain. Henrique watched from the back of the garden without taking the seat reserved for family. Beatriz did not attend, but she sent the restored original blueprint and authorized her testimony about the company's crisis to be archived for future research. It was the only contribution Livia accepted. When the bronze plaque was unveiled, Teresa wept in silence. Your mother would be proud, she said. Livia held her hand. I hope she would also be angry that it took us so long. Teresa smiled. Rosa knew how to do both. At the end of the ceremony, as guests began to leave, Henrique approached with 2 cups of coffee, didn't try to kiss her, handed her one, and asked if she needed help with the chairs. Livia said yes. The following months were not simple. Henrique and Livia began meeting away from the Acacia House, first in cafes, then on Sunday walks and couples therapy sessions. There were arguments, breaks, and days when Livia believed it would be easier to go on alone. Henrique did not use his effort as currency to demand a reward. When Beatriz tried to interfere, he ended the conversation before Livia needed to. When a new client doubted the studio's stability because of the scandal, Henrique offered no money or influence. He simply presented Livia's work to a cultural institution and let her competence do the rest. Almost a year later, standing before the main door of the Acacia House, he asked if he could enter without a formal invitation. Livia pulled a new key from her pocket. It wasn't the key to the property nor the one to the East Room. It was the key to a small room they had decided to turn into a shared library. This doesn't mean everything has gone back to how it was, she warned. Henrique held the key carefully. Good, she smiled. It means I'm opening a door because I chose to. This time he didn't enter before her. A year and 4 months after the opening of the Rosa Azevedo Center, the Acacia House no longer felt like a place where a family had spent decades protecting silences. On Tuesdays, students occupied the old hall with scale models and rolls of tracing paper. On weekends, neighbors visited exhibitions about women erased from the history of Brazilian architecture. Livia walked through the hallways without feeling like she needed to ask the walls for permission. That morning, however, she found a young woman sitting on the floor in front of the digital archive, crying while trying to turn off her phone. My name is Camilla, the student said. I was part of the mentorship program. I don't think I am anymore. On the screen, a firm was presenting a project created by Camilla during a workshop at the center as their own innovation. The drawing was signed only by the director of the office where she worked as an intern. Livia sat beside her and asked what had happened. Camilla explained that she had developed a ventilation system for historic buildings and sent the studies to Supervisor Eduardo Silveira, believing they would be reviewed together. The following week, he had presented the proposal to a client without mentioning her name. When she complained, she was told that interns learn by offering ideas and that insisting on authorship could close doors. He said no one would hire a girl who creates problems over a drawing. Livia felt Rosa's presence in that hallway, but she didn't turn her mother's story into a canned response. You have records of the process? Camilla confirmed she had saved messages, file versions, and comments from the supervisor himself. Then let's not start with revenge, Livia replied. Let's start with the truth. Afterward, you will decide what you want to protect. Being helped doesn't mean losing the right to choose. Enrique arrived shortly after, bringing boxes of books donated by a university. Since returning to work, he had chosen a role without direct control over the family business. He coordinated transparency and document preservation projects for the group, a field that was not glamorous but necessary. Upon hearing this, Camila asked if Eduardo's office had a business tie to the Montenegro Segros. The firm was competing for a contract to restore a hotel in Santos. Well, I can suspend the negotiation, he said. Camilla looked down, startled by the scale the problem was taking. Livia replied, Not yet. Enrique nodded. Years earlier, he would have interpreted that as distrust. Now he asked, What do you need from me? She handed him the group's integrity policy. Check if there's a formal investigation that keeps Camilla's name out of it until she's ready. He took the document. I'll do it today. He offered neither money nor an instant solution. Camilla watched the two of them and seemed to understand that this partnership had been earned, not inherited. The news reached Beatriz through another channel. After her leave, she served on a committee regarding corporate memory. At first, she treated the meetings as a punishment. Over time, she began reading testimonies showing how decisions celebrated by executives required sacrifices from people with no power to negotiate. When she heard about the case, she asked to speak with Livia. They met in the garden. Eduardo's father did business with Augusto, she explained. The family believes talent is something young people trade for opportunity. Livia crossed her arms. You are trying to protect him. Beatriz held her gaze. I am trying to prevent you from thinking that I don't recognize the pattern. She shared that Eduardo used to present group projects as personal accomplishments. If Camilla challenges him, he will say she is ungrateful. It was the word I used against Rosa when she asked for recognition. Livia asked why Beatriz was only speaking up now. Because admitting it when not forced is even harder than confessing when you've already lost everything. Camilla decided to participate in a mediation. She didn't want to destroy the firm, nor appear in news reports. She wanted her work acknowledged and for other interns to receive clear rules about authorship. Caio helped prepare for the meeting, but let her do the talking. Eduardo arrived with lawyers and stated that ideas developed during the internship belonged to the company. Camilla placed on the table the messages in which he described the proposal as her creation. I am not asking you to say that I worked alone. I am asking you to stop saying that you worked alone. Eduardo laughed and called her emotionally immature. Before Livia could answer, Beatriz leaned forward. Be careful with that word. For years I used it to make a woman seem irrational whenever she demanded something I didn't want to give back. Eduardo was rattled. You can't compare a family dispute to the routine of an office. Beatriz replied, Yes, you can. First, you use someone else's work. Then, when that person asks for recognition, you call gratitude an obligation and justice a scandal. The agreement recognized Camilla as the primary author of the technical solution, required the firm to create credit rules, and allowed her to choose between staying under new supervision or leaving with a formal recommendation and compensation for the project's use. Camilla chose to leave. interpreted it as a defeat, but Livia saw a woman refusing the idea that any door justified entering while bowed. A few weeks later, the Rosa Azevedo Center offered Camila a grant to continue the research approved by a committee in which Livia had no deciding vote. When the first prototype was installed at a public library in Santos, Camila asked that the plaque mention all the participants. "I don't just want my name," she explained. "I want no one to have to disappear for it to appear." Livia thought that perhaps Rosa's most important legacy wasn't the house, but the way her absence taught others to recognize presences. On the night of the presentation, Henrique and Livia walked along the shore. They no longer lived apart, but they also hadn't legally resumed their marriage. Their relationship grew on small agreements, not grand promises. Henrique asked if she had noticed that Beatriz had defended Camila without trying to control the outcome. "I noticed. That doesn't change what she did to my mother." "I know, but it changes what she chose to do today." Henrique took a small box out of his pocket. Livia stopped. "There's a ring in there. I'm going to throw you into the sea." He laughed and showed a simple plaque with two names engraved: Livia Azevedo and Henrique Montenegro, responsible for the Casa das Acacias library, without a petition. "I just wanted to know if I could put this on the door." She ran her thumb over the names. "Because mine comes first." Henrique replied that the library was born from her project. "And because I spent my life watching men put their names first just because they were used to the position." Livia put the plaque in her bag. "The decision about marriage continues not being resolved with engraved metal." Henrique agreed. "I didn't bring a solution. I brought a smaller question." He wanted to know if she could imagine a future by his side without feeling like she was betraying the woman who had to pull away to save herself. Livia took a while to answer. Part of her associated returning with submission, forgiveness with forgetting, and love with the risk of disappearing. "Sometimes I'm afraid that staying with you will make people think everything was forgiven because you behaved well for a while." Henrique looked at the sea. "And I'm afraid that every mistake will prove that I never changed." "You will make mistakes again." "You too." She smiled. "That was not very romantic. I'm trying to stop confusing romance with impossible promises." The following month, they decided to hold a small ceremony in the garden. They didn't call it a vow renewal because Livia didn't want to renew promises made by people who no longer existed. They called it a commitment to living together. Teresa Marina, Caio, Sergio, Camila, and a few friends attended. Beatriz received an invitation, but Livia made it clear that her presence would not mean absolution. She arrived early and brought Rosa's professional stamp found among old documents. Upon handing it over, she said, "I don't have the right to represent your mother. I only have the duty to return what was still with me." Livia accepted it. She didn't hug her but touched her hand for an instant. To Beatriz, that minimal gesture carried more weight than a forced reconciliation. Before the ceremony began, Henrique found Beatriz alone near the acacias. She asked if he really wanted to rebuild the marriage after everything. "I want to build a new one," he replied. Beatriz lowered her eyes. "And what if Livia never forgets what we did?" Henrique did not try to console her. "She doesn't need to forget. We are the ones who need to remember, without using guilt to demand that she take care of us." Beatriz watched her son for a few seconds. For the first time, she understood that losing control over him didn't mean losing him. It meant accepting that adult love wasn't obedience. Before the guests, Henrique did not promise to protect Livia from all conflicts. He said he had learned not to call the silence that requires someone else to endure pain peace. He promised to ask before deciding, to listen before defending, and to accept that love does not grant rights over others' choices. Livia did not promise absolute trust. She said she had learned not to use independence as a wall and not to decide alone, that someone would fail before letting them act. She promised not to abandon herself to keep the relationship, but also not to run from every difficult conversation. Instead of new rings, they used the old ones, after engraving 2 words inside, daily choice. When Henrique placed the ring on her finger, no one applauded immediately. For a few seconds, everyone remained silent. Not the silence used to hide, but the one that allows a truth to find its place. After the ceremony, Camilla asked for a photo in front of Rosa's plaque. Beatrice stood aside until Teresa called her over. Livia could have refused, but she made room without turning the gesture into complete forgiveness. In the image, no one occupied the absolute center. Behind them, the plaque kept the names of Augusto and Rosa visible. Beside it, the new library plaque bore the names of Livia and Henrique on the same line. Beatrice looked at the photograph. I spent my life believing that if another name appeared, mine would diminish. Camilla replied with spontaneity. A name doesn't take up space like that. What erases a name is someone deciding there's only room for one. Beatrice nodded without defending herself. Livia realized the house had finally learned something its former residents didn't know: memory. It wasn't a table with just one head of the table. In the late afternoon, Livia found Henrique gathering chairs in the garden. She asked if he regretted not having organized a big celebration. The old version of me would have invited 500 people to prove that everything was fine, he replied. And the current version? Prefers to ask if you are okay when no one is looking. Livia said she was tired, happy, and a little scared. Henrique felt the same. They entered the House of Acacias together and stopped in front of the library. The newly installed sign shone under the hallway light. Inside were books, restored plants, and a table large enough for shared work. It was not a patriarch's room, nor a matriarch's parlor. It was a space without a head at the table. Henrique waited for her to enter first. Livia held his hand and pulled him to her side. This time we enter together. Thus the house ceased to be proof of a debt, a symbol of a dispute, or a reward for a victory. It became what Rosa might have imagined from the beginning, a place where no one had to disappear to belong. This story was created as an entertaining family drama, but its main message goes beyond the dispute over a mansion. It speaks of the erasure of women's work, of families that use tradition to hide injustices, and of the difference between protecting peace and forcing someone to remain silent. The House of Acacias represents any space built with the effort of people who never received their due recognition. The educational aspect of the narrative lies in how each character must take responsibility for their choices. Livia learns that independence does not mean facing everything alone. Henrique understands that remaining neutral in the face of an injustice is also a decision. Beatrice shows that fear and suffering may explain cruel behavior, but they do not eliminate its consequences. The forgiveness presented in the story is not automatic, mandatory, or sufficient on its own. It depends on truth, boundaries, reparation, and changes demonstrated over time. As entertainment, the plot offers conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, family secrets, property disputes, romance, investigation, and emotional twists. However, the goal is not just to have the audience celebrate the antagonist's humiliation. The true victory happens when the characters break a pattern of silence and prevent the same injustice from being repeated, with a new generation represented by Camilla. The final message is that love should not erase anyone's identity. Family cannot be used as an excuse to control, and success does not belong only to the person with the most power to put their own name on a sign. Relationships can be rebuilt, but only when everyone understands that trust is not a debt, it is a choice renewed by daily actions.